A captivating summary of the Gospel of Matthew, faith like you've never seen before. I want you to imagine this opening scene. We're standing in the middle of a crowded city street. Horns blaring on every side. People rushing by without even glancing at each other. All lost in their own concerns. Suddenly, a stranger stops in the middle of this chaotic flow of humanity and sees someone who has fallen behind, a person carrying countless burdens. Physically and emotionally. The stranger kneels down without a second thought. Offers a helping hand. And lifts the weight off that weary soul's shoulders. In this single moment of radical compassion, we witness the heartbeat of what the Gospel of Matthew is all about, the powerful love that transforms. The kind of faith that leads us to truly see each other. And it all points back to the teachings and life of Christ that we are about to explore. By the end of this journey, you, I, and we together will discover the wisdom that can shift the very ground we walk on. Opening our hearts to a depth of faith we may never have imagined. I believe there is something deeply powerful about the words found in the Gospel of Matthew. Not merely because they're ancient texts or because generations upon generations have studied them, but because they tap into an enduring truth about love, redemption, and personal transformation. These words are about you and me, and the silent struggles we carry on the inside. Longing for someone to assure us that there's more to our existence than simply the sum of our pains and flaws. Matthew's Gospel presents Jesus Christ as a teacher, a healer, and a guiding light, someone who welcomes the broken with open arms and who challenges the proud to soften their hearts. Right here, you and I have a chance to step into these teachings like never before and see how they resonate with the ache and the hope that define our times. What if the key to living a fulfilling life had been waiting for us all along? Hidden in plain sight? Think about that. It's not that the Gospel of Matthew is necessarily obscure. Many of us have come across verses from it, maybe from the Sermon on the Mount or the countless parables that shape Christian thought. But how often do we pause to let those words strike at the core of who we are? There's this radical statement in Matthew where Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." What in the world does that really mean for us today? In a time when social media is saturated with images of luxurious lifestyles and we're pressured to keep up? Could it be that letting go of the relentless pursuit of status and instead embracing a humble openness is the key to unlocking profound joy? That's one of the first mysteries we'll explore together. A real-life challenge to our modern pursuit of validation. Now, let's set the stage for what we're going to uncover in the Gospel of Matthew. In the opening chapters, we're introduced to Jesus' origin story, which includes an unexpected cast, magi from the east, bringing gifts to honor a baby who they believe will change the world. We also see the jealousy of a ruler, Herod, who is so threatened by the prophecy of a newborn king that he unleashes suffering to maintain his grip on power. If we think about it, this tension, between those who recognize hope in humble places and those who fear losing control, is still very much alive today. Aren't we all a bit like Herod when we feel threatened by anything that challenges our sense of dominance or comfort? And maybe we are also like the Magi, journeying across great distances, spiritual or emotional, to find something bigger than ourselves. It's a question worth asking. Which do we identify with more? Do we run from transformative truths out of fear? Or do we seek them out no matter the cost? This dynamic tension in Matthew's Gospel then blossoms into Jesus' public ministry, where he calls ordinary people to follow him. Picture fishermen near the Sea of Galilee, dropping their nets, a symbol of leaving behind the only life they've known, to embark on a path of unknowns. That call echoes throughout history, reaching us in our busy lives, full of obligations and doubts. Each time we feel a nudge toward something new, something courageous, We're confronted with a choice: do we cling to the familiar? Or do we allow ourselves to be called into a purpose that might surpass everything we thought we wanted? Maybe you're at a crossroads in life, uncertain if you should take that new job, move to a new city, or reconcile with a family member you haven't spoken to in years. The invitation from Matthew's Gospel is to follow where love and faith lead, even if it takes us out of our comfort zones. Now, let's talk about the Sermon on the Mount. Arguably one of the most iconic teachings in the entire New Testament. It's that moment when Jesus goes up on a mountainside, sits down, and starts to teach the people about how to truly live. He begins with the Beatitudes, those paradoxical blessings that sound almost upside down. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. We hear these statements and might wonder, how can mourning or meekness ever be something to celebrate? That's the paradox, in letting ourselves be real and vulnerable, instead of constantly posturing and pretending we have it all together. We become capable of receiving something far more precious than worldly admiration. We open ourselves to grace, to the kind of love that meets us right where we are. That is the radical message in the Gospel of Matthew. And in Christ's teaching overall, the most vulnerable places in our hearts can become the gateways to genuine transformation. Have you ever noticed how much of our modern culture revolves around performance? We strive for perfection. We hustle to prove our worth. And we can be very quick to judge anyone who falls short. Then Jesus comes along and says, "Judge not, that you be not judged." That simple phrase, found in Matthew, speaks volumes. It's not just a call to be polite, it's an invitation to check our own hearts before pointing fingers. If we spent less time obsessing over other people's mistakes and more time shining a light on our own failings, we'd not only become more compassionate, but also more attuned to our real condition as humans in need of forgiveness and grace. Could you imagine how your relationships might change if you approached disagreements with empathy rather than judgment? Or how your own self-image might heal if you recognize that we're all broken in some way? This is Matthew's challenge to our assumptions about righteousness. You can't fix the world by constantly diagnosing other people's flaws. You start with your own heart. In that same sermon, Jesus also talks about being the salt of the earth and the light of the world. This is an iconic metaphor that says something astounding about each of us: we can make a difference. Think about salt. It seasons, preserves, enhances flavor. Light guides, reveals, warms. So when Jesus says, "You are the light of the world," he's not just talking to the select few, he's talking to anyone willing to embrace a life of genuine love and integrity. This kind of love and integrity isn't just an emotion, it's a choice to put compassion ahead of selfishness, to speak truth even when it's uncomfortable, and to care about people who can't repay you. Imagine how radically our world could change if more of us took this teaching seriously. This is not just some lofty spiritual ideal, it's a practical command to let the love of God shine through us in the simplest, everyday actions. When was the last time you let your light shine for someone who felt trapped in darkness? One of the Gospel's recurring themes is the idea of the kingdom of heaven. We see parables about seeds, weeds, pearls, treasures, wedding feasts, each one offering a glimpse into what God's kingdom looks like. Often, these parables speak about small beginnings having a monumental impact, like a tiny mustard seed that grows into a tree where birds can nest. This suggests that we shouldn't despise the days of small beginnings. Whether that's a fledgling business, a fragile family reconciliation, or a personal habit of daily prayer. Could it be that by nurturing these small acts of faith, we eventually see transformations bigger than anything we ever anticipated? That's the marvelous potential embedded in Matthew's Gospel. The smallest act of faith can ripple outward and affect countless lives, even if we can't see the impact immediately. And then there are moments of rising tension and conflict in Matthew, illustrating how faith collides with the harsh realities of life. We see examples of betrayal, like when Judas sells out Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. We see Jesus confronting corrupt authorities and religious leaders who place burdens on people's shoulders but don't lift a finger to help. Sometimes, we might find ourselves betrayed by a friend or coworker. Or maybe we're the ones placing heavy expectations on others without offering understanding. These moments in Scripture, particularly in Matthew, are deeply relevant to our shared human experience. We realize that not all conflicts can be solved by a simple solution. And yet there's an invitation to a deeper faith, a deeper compassion, and an otherworldly peace that can guide us through our darkest moments. When you've been wronged or have wronged someone else, have you ever asked yourself how Matthew's Gospel might shape your response? One of the most startling elements in Matthew's telling of Jesus' story is how he interacts with people who are considered outcasts or sinners. There are countless narratives of Christ sitting down with tax collectors, conversing with people from marginalized communities, offering healing and forgiveness to those shunned by society. It's an image of a man who doesn't just teach in lofty terms but shows us that love must transcend every boundary we create. This is the kind of love that will kneel down in that crowded city street to help a stranger. And it's not just about literal healing. It's also emotional healing, spiritual healing, the bridging of divides. This stands in stark contrast to our divisive age, where lines are drawn so quickly and harshly. Think about it. How often do we sit down with those who think differently than us, who look different, who have different political or religious perspectives? Could we dare to go beyond labels and see the innate human dignity in the other person? That's the question the Gospel of Matthew throws back at us, urging us to cross dividing lines just as Christ did. When we see Jesus calm a storm in Matthew or feed 5,000 hungry people with just a few loaves and fish, we might be tempted to focus on the miraculous aspects alone. But there's also a deeper message. Christ is showing that when faith is placed in God, scarcity becomes abundance, and chaos can give way to peace. I wonder if you and I have had times where we felt that our resources, financial, emotional, spiritual, were so limited that there was no way forward. And in that very space, an unexpected phone call, a heartfelt conversation, or a chance to shift our perspective somehow provided the abundance we needed. The Gospel's wisdom is not about ignoring reality, it's about recognizing that in Christ, there's a deeper resource than we can often imagine. Sometimes it's the courage to persevere, the resilience to keep going, or the creativity to see solutions we've overlooked. We might call that a miracle in itself. Matthew also delves deep into the cost of following Christ. There's this powerful moment when Jesus challenges would-be disciples to count the cost, reminding them that the path he offers isn't necessarily paved with comfort. In a world that sells us instant gratification, this message can be jarring. Why follow something that requires us to deny ourselves, to take up our cross? But Jesus flips the script. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. It's paradoxical, yet it resonates in the deepest part of our being. We find true freedom and identity when we let go of our illusions of control and the need to selfishly guard our own interests. If you reflect on your own life, you might notice that the times you felt truly alive were when you gave of yourself, your time, your love, your resources, without calculating the cost. There's a transcendent peace in living for something bigger than ourselves. That, I believe, is the heart of what Jesus points us toward in Matthew, to lose ourselves in a love that is greater. And in doing so, discover our true selves. It's also fascinating how Matthew's Gospel pays attention to the smallest gestures: a cup of cold water offered to the thirsty, a single coin from a widow, a moment of mercy to the undeserving. In a world addicted to the pursuit of big wins and massive achievements, these small gestures can feel insignificant. But this teaching encourages us to see that every small act of kindness is like a seed, capable of bearing extraordinary fruit. If you think your contribution is too small to matter, remember that in Matthew, Jesus praises those who do the little things with great love. The subversive message is that the posture of our hearts in these small acts might be more significant than grand public gestures performed for attention. As we journey deeper into the gospel narrative, we see Jesus in confrontation with religious leaders who misrepresent God's heart by clinging to strict legalism. He calls out hypocrisy and addresses how outward appearances can hide inner decay. That might be one of the hardest pills for us to swallow in modern times, where image can become everything. We can easily fall into the trap of presenting ourselves as flawless on social media, or even in our closest relationships, while inside, we're struggling with fear, pride, or jealousy. Matthew's account challenges us: what does it profit you to gain the whole world but lose your soul? That's a question that hits hard. Our souls matter. Our integrity matters. How we treat people when no one is watching matters. If you're tired of wearing masks and performing for acceptance, Matthew's Gospel might be the doorway to a new kind of freedom. It's an invitation to authenticity, grounded in a love that sees us fully and still beckons us to come closer. We're nearing that point in the story where Jesus heads to Jerusalem, fully aware of the suffering that awaits him. Sometimes, life leads us straight into challenges we can't avoid: heartbreaks, illnesses, betrayals. The tension in Matthew's narrative intensifies because we sense that the man who has done nothing but heal, teach, and love is about to be misunderstood, condemned, and crucified. This powerful setup confronts us with the question: how do we respond when doing the right thing seems to come with a steep price? Do we step back and try to salvage ourselves? Or do we press on, trusting that love is worth the cost? The ultimate moment of heartbreak and triumph in Matthew is, of course, the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. Let's hold off on diving too deep into that right now, because I want us to savor the weight and wonder of it when we reach that climax. For now, consider how the earlier parts of Matthew's Gospel set the stage for this earth-shattering conclusion. We've seen Jesus' birth, his teachings, the miracles, the controversies, and the glimpses of an upside-down kingdom. All of it leads us to the foot of the cross, where we see the love of God poured out without restraint, and eventually to an empty tomb that defies every assumption about death's finality. If we allow that to penetrate our hearts, it might redefine how we see every challenge, every sorrow, and every hope in our own journey. Take a moment to reflect. Do you feel this stirring in your spirit? This sense that something in these stories resonates with a longing you've held onto for a very long time? Maybe you're searching for peace in a world that never stops screaming for your attention. Maybe you're carrying guilt or shame that won't relent. Or you're dealing with loss that feels overwhelming. Or perhaps you're simply thirsty for something real, truth with a capital T. The Gospel of Matthew doesn't offer a shallow fix. It points us to a love that meets us where we are and transforms us from the inside out. Sometimes, it's a slow and painstaking process, requiring us to face ourselves honestly. Sometimes, it's a radical breakthrough that happens in a blinding moment of clarity. Either way, it's about encountering a God who is personal, who cares deeply about the nuances of our lives, and who calls us to step into a story far greater than our own. But none of this truly sinks in until we grapple with a deeper question: how do I respond to the call that echoes from these pages? It's not enough to just admire these teachings at a distance. They beg a response. You, me, and every listener has a choice. Do we open ourselves to this transformative faith? Or do we choose to keep it at arm's length? Matthew's Gospel shows us that many encountered Jesus. Some received him joyfully. Some were offended and walked away. Some outright plotted against him. It's a choice we can't dodge. Because even indifference is a choice. So here's the question I pose to you. One that's meant to challenge your perspective at the deepest level. If the love described in Matthew's Gospel is real and living, how can it change your life starting this very moment? Reflect on what that might look like: a shift in how you spend your time, in how you treat your family or co-workers, in how you see your own worth. I believe that if we allow ourselves to be captivated by the message of Matthew, we'll become part of an ongoing story of divine love intersecting with the human condition, rewriting narratives of brokenness into testimonies of hope. Yes, it might sound grandiose, but I've seen glimpses of it happen in people's lives, individuals laying aside deep grudges to reconcile, ordinary folks selling what they have to serve the poor, parents rediscovering the preciousness of their children, and addicts finding freedom by surrendering their struggle to a higher power. In this first part of our journey, we've only begun to scratch the surface of the Gospel of Matthew. We've talked about the opening scenes, the Sermon on the Mount, the parables, the miraculous accounts, and the conflicts that set the stage for the defining moments of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. Together, we've seen how profoundly these teachings clash with modern values that often emphasized self over service, revenge over forgiveness, and cynicism over faith. Yet, it's precisely this clash that can lead us to question our assumptions and open us to a whole new way of living. Now, I want to invite you to continue this exploration with me. As we move forward, we'll walk alongside Jesus through his final days, through the betrayal, the suffering, and ultimately the dawn of a new hope that changes everything. We'll tackle the most challenging aspects of the gospel: why suffering exists, what real sacrifice looks like, how forgiveness is possible when you're deeply hurt, and what it truly means to be a follower of Christ in a world that often pushes us to conform. There's more wisdom, more depth, and more practical guidance waiting for us in the remaining chapters of Matthew. If you're feeling that gentle nudge in your heart, that's the invitation. Will you join me in the next step of this journey? If you're ready to dive deeper into the secrets that the rest of Matthew holds, then stay tuned, because we're about to see how faith, once fully tested, reveals truths that can help us face life's greatest obstacles. As we transition into the next phase, imagine how your perspective might shift if you truly believed that love triumphs over even the greatest darkness. Imagine how that belief might alter your decisions, your priorities, and your capacity to hope. Let's discover it together.